Very delighted to welcome you all to the second roundtable discussion, season 2022. I'm Dr. Aline Nassar, the board chairman and CEO of Stocus Australia. Today joined by Quzat Al-Amar, executive consultant, and Roger Aad, senior consultant. And on behalf of Stocus Australia and Knowledge Zone UAE, it is my immense pleasure to welcome you all. When Dr. Brian was immersed in his research on questions, he was enlightened by one simple observation. We know a lot about questions. However, we know very little about answers. Dr. Brian once said, in grade school, we teach children about questions, not answers. This is so rightly said. We all learn a lot about the 6 questions. The why, the what, when, where, who, and how. We all have been trained in questions. However, we do not learn much about answers. Why so? Because there is little to no work on the taxonomy of answers. Did you know that business books with question in the title outnumber those with answer in the title? The ratio of those is 3 to 1. Our speaker for today, Dr. Brian Glibkowski, will enlighten us on the importance of answers. And more than this, how we can make influence with the right answer. Dr. Brian is an author, researcher, and futurist. He is very passionate about the role of questions and answers in today's business and society. Brian's journey started with his research on questions, and a milestone that is worth mentioning is Brian's article on questions that has been recognized by the Association of Human Resource Development as one of 10 articles that will shape the 21st century. Brian's new book, Answer Intelligence, Raise Your AQ, introduces a new science of answers that is nominated for a 2022 Prose Award for Professional and Scholarly Excellence. The AQ framework has been adopted by universities, including the Imperial College of London Business School. Certified AQ partners from around the globe, like the United States of America, UK, UAE, Australia, India, and elsewhere, use AQ with forward-thinking organizations around the world. Brian, we are all excited to dive in, but before we give the floor to you, let's go over some housekeeping items. Dear participants, if you have questions and comments, please pop those in the chat box, or alternatively use the raise hand option if you would like to speak yourself. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Brian to take us on this enlightening AQ journey. Brian, the e-floor is all yours.
Thank you, Eileen. Really appreciate the introduction. Let me just bring up my slides here. First of all, I want to say, please ask questions at any point. Approximately halfway through, we'll have a break for discussion, and then at the end for an extended discussion, but please ask questions at any point. So first, I'd like to start by having you think about your most important conversations: sales, teamwork, leadership. I'm going to lean into interviews. We can think of interviews as a conversation of questions and answers. Of course, when we're in an interview, a lot of questions are coming to us. And we provide the answers, it's the answers that give us the opportunity to get the job. So if you're having a Fuji level conversation, the questions are coming in, you provide compelling answers, and you do well enough to get the job, okay? You have the job offer. Any able-bodied person can climb Mount Fuji. Now let's imagine the stakes go up. The questions increase in their difficulty, and on an interview, you provide more compelling answers. And if you have a Denali level conversation, your answers are so effective that you are the #1 candidate for the job. And finally, we can reach the heights of Everest. These are high stakes conversations. The questions are coming towards you and you answer in such a compelling way that a job is invented for you. They want you that bad, okay? So here, in brief, we're talking about different high stakes conversations. And again, you're gonna have high stakes conversations in leadership, teamwork, sales, in any area at home or work. And you have an opportunity to elevate your answers to have maximum impact. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How can you elevate your answers to have an Everest level impact for your most important conversations? So again, the focus here is raising your influence using answers. And we're going to go on a little journey today. We're going to start at the base of the mountain and we're going to go all the way up to the top. And I just want to briefly amplify Eileen's introduction. As Eileen correctly articulated, I've done a lot of research on questions and realized we know a lot about questions, we know less about answers. And that was really the genesis of this book, is to understand the answers that we can provide to influence others. So as Eileen articulated, we know about the 6 question types, right? We've learned that. This book really started with focusing on this black box and answers. What are the different types of answers that we can provide? And knowing those answers can help us to influence others. So we're going to talk about these answers today, unpack them, and talk about some of the high AQ practices you can use in your most important conversations. Another award that Eileen didn't mention is it's up for the 2022 Smart Thinking Award for books that introduce new ideas or cast light on old ideas and subjects. So I think this is a good summary of what AQ is. We all have familiarity with questions and answers, but this is giving us a lens to focus upon answers to be more influential. So we're gonna start here on base camp. And if you're climbing a mountain, when you're at base camp, you're getting ready for the climb ahead. So before we really dig into the material in depth, I want us to do some preparation, some thinking about answers. So in a second here, I'm gonna actually ask you to respond if you're so inclined. So why don't you feel prepared to open up your mic or put a comment in the chat area. And as we've talked about here twice now, I would make the argument that we know more about questions than answers, right? We have a typology of questions, we have no typology of answers. Sales, coaching methodologies are based on questions. We know more about questions. I think that's true. I want to ask you a different question. Which do you think is more important, questions or answers? So you could say questions are more important than answers. You could say answers are more important than questions, or you could say they're about equal. So I'd be curious if anyone is inclined to respond to that question. Which do you think is more important? We'll see if we're warmed up enough. It's very early in our conversation. We may not have anyone that wants to speak. Floor is open. Eileen?
Let's take Ziad first.
I think, in my opinion, questions are more important because you need to tailor your answer based on the question.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Would anyone else like to respond to this?
In the chat box, we have from DM said it's equally important. Gonil Karadas also says equally important. Anybody else? Let's go for Amani.
Hello, it's Amani. I'm a TV presenter, first of all. I think it's equal because without a question, there's no answer.
Okay, thank you for that, Amani.
Well, perfect. I think we can move on. So I think
I just need to acknowledge one more answer, Brian, in the chat box, because that says answers, because It's the way you answer, not only the answer itself. So it's not just the words.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's the type of answer we're going to talk about, and then the substance of the answer. We can have a compelling story or a weak story, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is good. This is just.
I'm sorry, but I would like to acknowledge each and every comment. So if you allow me, Rahma also said answers are more important. Rami says they're equally important. And that should conclude the answer.
Well, that's great. Usually when I open it up, more comments are weighted towards questions, which is fine. And here it seems like everyone in attendance here is saying they're equal, or perhaps even answers are more important. I think the point I want to say is I've done research on questions and answers. I think they're both important, and it's not about one or the other, in my opinion, but there's a gap. We know a lot less about answers, and it's really going to be the focus today is the answer side of the equation, which you'll see also includes questions. So we're going to look at both those today. This is one way I like to summarize the relationship of questions and answers. Questions and answers both serve many functions. I would assert that a primary function of questions is curiosity. We ask about things we don't know. There's a gap. And answers fill that gap. And when we fill that gap, we influence others. We talked about interviews. I'll give you another thought experiment. Imagine you're in sales. You only close the deal when you answer the proverbial question that keeps the executive buyer up at night, right? It's the answers that have influence. They get you the job. They close the deal. They help your subordinates in mentoring achieve higher levels of job performance, et cetera, and so forth. So both are important. And we're going to focus on answers. However, I will assert there are aspects of answers that are more difficult, more challenging, more important than questions. And I just want to highlight a couple points, a couple subtleties related to answers. I would assert answers are more difficult than questions. For example, I could articulate some really difficult questions right now. What is the meaning of life? You know, what are you going to be when you grow up? These are difficult questions, but more difficult are the answers to those questions. Okay, and I think if you reflect on that, you might agree with that statement. Answers are very difficult. I want to talk about two aspects of answers. We've talked about answers when you provide them to others, like in a job interview, you get the job. That's influence. So answers can be outwardly directed, or they can be inwardly directed towards yourself. We call that sense making, right? We use answers like stories. We have stories we tell ourselves about why we're going to be successful. That's can be used for others, but it can be used for yourself, sense making. And here's something that I want to share. You may have heard this. The question is the answer. See, this is the problem. The question is not the answer. The question is the question. The answer is the answer. To suggest otherwise is tautological. So we want to give both questions and answer their ample space to understand. So now let's start to get into more of the meat of the topic. I'm going to introduce you to the 6 high EQ answer types momentarily. I have 3 goals for our time together today. First, it's to reimagine what communication is. Reimagining in a capital R sense would be like starting at the top of the circle, going on a journey of this discussion and going all the way back to the beginning and sort of understanding it for the first time. That's a capital R. I don't want to be that ambitious. In a lowercase r sense, if we can just move a little bit around the circle, have a new understanding of answers, I think that would be a great goal for us today. I want to share with you an example. When I first reimagined that answer intelligence was something that was real. This is when I was first developing the framework, and I was starting to experiment with it in the real world. And there was one situation where I had a conversation. It was me. I was a consultant. I was working with the CEO of a company, and I wanted to bring in a third party, a technology firm. And all 3 of us had to work together. So in AQ, one of the answers is a metaphor. And I wanted to deliver a metaphor to the CEO. So I wanted to convey an answer to the question, what is a partnership? I wanted to convey that all three of us had to work together. So I Googled partnership and I was looking for a metaphor, and I came across this three-legged stool, and I said, I like that. And I went to talk to the CEO and I delivered the metaphor. I said, our partnership is all three of us. It's like a three-legged stool. We all have to work together. If one of the legs pulls out, the stool is going to fall down. Okay, so I just delivered it like that, and I bit my lips a little bit because I was a little bit unsure if that was a good metaphor, if that was going to work, and it did work. How did I know it worked? Because 1 week later, I had another meeting with the CEO, and unprompted, he delivered that metaphor back to me. And I started to sort of believe that AQ was a framework that could help me influence. More generally, I started to ask myself, that's interesting, the metaphor worked, but why did it work? I've been around students as a professor, and sometimes they deliver effective metaphors, sometimes not. And I was trying to figure out why this answer worked. And as I started to think about this answer intelligence framework, the metaphor worked because all the other answers I provided to the CEO worked. I provided a story of how this third-party technologist worked with others. I provided a theory, which is also called business strategy, about how our relationship was going to improve performance at the CEO's firm. I talked about the concept of partnership. I defined it and broke it down into pieces. I talked about procedures and actions of how our relationship was going to go forward, the steps and key actions. So in total, the metaphor worked because it was supported by all other answers. And this was another insight into the framework. So this is where I really began my journey to reimagine what communication is. As you think about your most important conversations, you can fill in the gap. AQ works for any important conversation: sales, teamwork, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in each of these conversations, there's going to be important why, what, and how questions. In the example I just gave, the questions were, what is a partnership? Why is the partnership important? How do we work together? Okay, and I gave compelling answers in each of those areas. The second goal today is to learn. AQ came from the golf course. The original research, we interviewed the top golf instructors in the world. It was rated by Golf Digest and Golf Magazine. And you're probably wondering, why golf? There are really two reasons. One, this sample was an expert sample. Those we studied were in the upper half of the 99th percentile. It's always great to study experts. Second, these golf instructors taught a wide range of students. So they taught touring pros you see on TV. They taught weekend warriors, your young son or daughter picking up the sticks for the first time, and everybody in between. And that was very important because in research speak, there was no restriction of range. These golf instructors taught individuals that had more knowledge in some areas, less knowledge, were more motivated, less motivated, et cetera, and so forth. So in your conversations in the office and at home, you're going to have these asymmetries of motivation, of knowledge, and they were able to navigate these conversations very effectively, and that was very important for any conversation that you're going to have. So we're going to introduce 5 high IQ practices, actually 6 high IQ practices that you can use starting today. So we're going to cover that. And third, and most importantly, there's going to be some takeaways. There's this framework you can start to think about and use to influence others in your most important conversation and provide more effective answers, elevated answers to influence others. That's the third goal today. So let's climb. Let's get the gear on. Let's start climbing. Let's start getting into the frameworks. That's what we're going to do now. First thing I want to point out, and many of you are probably aware of this, you already use AQ. Okay, this is codifying a framework that is in use. Let me give you some examples. So I would assert that any important conversation you have is centered around questions and answers, right? You're asking questions of others, they're asking questions of you, you're providing answers, they're providing answers. Every important conversation involves questions and answers. Second, let's examine some common ways of looking at communication. Take nonverbals. I would assert that most of the nonverbal reactions we have in conversations are related to answers. So imagine you're telling a story to this person right here, and they start to smile. They're giving you nonverbal feedback. They like the story, giving you perhaps permission to tell another story, to deepen the story. So all 6 answer types are types of nonverbal feedback that you can use in conversations. Another example, perhaps the reaction here is not quite as positive. Maybe you delivered what you thought was a big idea to your team about how you're going to go forward, and the idea, the concept did not land. That's feedback to maybe develop a better concept, right? Or perhaps they get the concept, but they want to know how to do it. So you might have to move on to a different answer type, perhaps procedure. So AQ exists within nonverbals. I'm going to give you another example related to communication. Before I do, I want to set this up. In the late 1970s, sports psychology first came onto the scene. And one of the things that sports psychology focused on was mindfulness. So imagine you're playing tennis here at Arthur Ashe Stadium in the United States, and the ball is coming at you. One approach towards mindfulness is that when the ball hits the ground over the net, you say the word bounce. And then when you hit the ball with your racket, as you make contact, you say racket. So you're constantly saying bounce and racket. And the purpose of that is to be mindful in your activities. When the ball bounces, you're getting your feet set, you're hitting and making good contact. So we can appropriate that same approach for mindfulness for active listening. So imagine if you're in a conversation and you can sub-vocalize the questions that others are asking. So this person may hear a how question, and you would say to yourself, I hear a how question. And then your next response would be to say to yourself in your head, I'm going to be providing a procedure action. So on and so forth, you can identify questions and answers. And this is what we mean by active listening, to be engaged in the conversation, ready to understand the questions, be able to provide answers. And this is a technique you can start to use today, and it'll have a really strong impact on your communication. You're going to be more purposeful, more direct, more impactful, more influential. Now I want to go through examples of, Eileen, please.
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to just appreciate and acknowledge your previous slide and just comment that it happens a lot to us, to our staff, to our colleagues, even to our kids. Someone hears a question, if they're not mindful of what type of question that is, then they answer. But the answer is not necessarily the answer to that question. And that makes the person asking the question, but I want to know how, or but I want to know when, to repeat the question. So being mindful, as in the active listening, is definitely the key to knowing what to use. Shall I use a concept to explain it, a metaphor, a story, a procedure, etc.? So I so much like what you said, because I can relate, and I'm sure everybody in the audience can do too.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point. Just 2 follow-ups. First of all, we'll talk about this related to high AQ practice, 0 question recognition, right? We have to recognize the question, provide the answer. Second, there's simple things you can do to make sure your answers land. So imagine if this person hears a how question, she could say, would you like me to explain a procedure, or would you like me to provide the steps of how to do that? And they're going to get feedback and guidance from their party is going to say yes or no. So it's another way of navigating the conversation. So we're going to get into that. So now we're going to go through examples of each of the 6 answers. So I want you to sort of actively be involved. Use active listening here. Use the exact technique we just talked about. So think of this question. What is leadership? Think of the answers you're going to respond with. It could be a concept answer or a metaphor answer. So I'll unpack a couple answers to some basic questions. What is leadership? So this is one way of providing that answer. You could answer, pardon me, going backwards, you could answer this question with a concept. So you could define leadership and you could break it down into smaller pieces. So I could say leadership is inspiring others and holding people accountable. You may disagree with that dimensionalization, but I have ideas of what leadership is. So I could discuss the concept. Second, I could provide a metaphor. I could say leadership is like two ropes. When they're separate, they're strong, but when they're braided together, they're stronger. That's how I lead. I inspire and hold people accountable each meeting. So that's an example of high EQ. You have command of concepts, you have command of metaphors, you can provide one or the other answer as you see fit. Second, let's examine this question. It's perhaps a question you ask yourself or others ask you, why are you successful? So I'm going to tell you a story about a discussion I had with a high-ranking Navy SEAL in the United States. I flew out to Maryland. I live in Chicago to spend a day with the Navy SEAL. And I asked him this simple question, why are you successful? And he proceeded to tell me about a capture or kill mission in the Philippines. Essentially, some locals were beheaded. The Navy SEALs were brought in to capture the bad guys. As the story goes, our Navy SEAL approached the hut of the village elder in his heavily armored Hummer. So he's driving up. He arrived at the hut of the elder, and he proceeded to get out of his heavily armored Hummer. And when he got out, he took off his body armor, okay? Then he walked up to the hut, went inside, and then he sat directly next to the village elder. They had a nice conversation. It went well. And over the next couple of short weeks, they developed a relationship, and the village elder gave over the names of the insurgents. Okay, that's a story. That's a terse story. I think most of us would recognize that's a story. I'm going to talk more about this in a second. Specifically, I want to talk about it in terms of theory that answers this question, why are you successful? There are 6 levers, 6 resources that a Navy SEAL could provide to the village elder. On one extreme, it could be money. This could be bribing the village elder. At the other extreme, involvement. And this would involve making the village elder believe that they have a common purpose, perhaps for the common good. We're working together. So here's a rhetorical question. Which of these 6 resources do you think the Navy SEAL focused on in the story? I'll give you a second to think about this. The answer is status. And what we see here is a theory is cause and effect. Status leads to success. That's cause and effect logic. Let me break this down for you. As we discussed the story, there were 2 points at which status was at play. As the Navy SEAL approached the hut of the village elder, he got out and took off his body armor. That was to make status equal, right? The Navy SEALs have all the armor, all the weapons, and he wanted to equal out status. That's step 1. Second, when the Navy SEAL got into the hut, he sat directly next to the village elder. In Philippine culture, those with high status sit directly next to each other. And the point of this example is that a lot of times we get the theory wrong. Navy SEALs are some of the most highly trained individuals in the world. More money is spent on them than perhaps any other professionals, with few exceptions. But nonetheless, Navy SEALs get it wrong. So he told me that many SEAls will do the opposite. They'll leave their body armor on because they don't want to get shot at, so they're not equaling out status. And then they're going to sit opposite of the village elder, sort of Western style, where important people sit opposite of each other in boardrooms. So the point here is, you can see a Navy SEAL wanting to tell this story about success to his colleagues, right, to inspire them. Second, it's very important to tell about the theory, because if you don't have the theory, you could lack precision. So someone may not get the true point of the story. So you have to be able to explain stories and to provide theory for your most important questions. Finally, we're going to move on to the how question, and we'll look at something more fun. A couple years ago, I took up road biking, cycling. I really like that a lot. And let me ask you this question. How do you cycle without falling off? Okay, this is road biking. When I bought my bike, they told me you're going to fall and you're probably going to skid up your arms. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But I did. So here's rhetorically, where does the falling occur? The beginning of the ride, when you get on the bike, in the middle when you're riding, or at the end. So think about that for a second. And those of you that are road bike enthusiasts will know the answer is when you get off. And the reason is because of this. When you're on a road bike, you're clipped in, you're locked into the bike. On a normal bike, there are no clips. And what do? Just at the last second, you put your feet down. But in a road bike, if you take your clips off at the very last second, it's too late and you're going to crash. And I did that several times. So in AQ terms, this is an example of a procedural problem. Procedures are steps. Think of the difference between procedures and actions. When we talk about baking a cake, it's the 10 steps. That's a procedure. Any given step, cracking the egg, is an action. So there was a procedural problem. I should have had a different procedure, right? Step one, very early on before I was stopping my bike, unclip. Step two, coast for a while. Step three, take my feet and put them down the ground. So I could have done the procedure differently. So all of us have procedures we can improve upon. Now let's look at actions more specifically. If I was going to ask you this, how do you cycle faster downhill? Okay. So if you think about this, you probably come up with some answers and say, well, change the gear, pedal harder. These are nice answers. Perhaps the best answer is this. This is called the Superman position. Ideally, your legs are completely parallel, so they're aerodynamic. Google it. Google Superman position and cycling, and you'll see people doing this. It's more aerodynamic, and you will ride faster than anyone that's pedaling. So this is an example of a high AQ action. It's unique. It adds value, and those are the kind of actions you want to have. And by the way, I didn't say, how do you cycle safer downhill? I said faster. This is extremely dangerous. Please do not do this. Yes, Roger. Oh, is that
Right.
a high five?
No, no, just raising my hand. This technique was used actually in the Tour de France, by the way, the Superman one.
Yeah. Yeah, I
You
think
you can see the flow of the guy doing this technique going faster than the guys pedaling. So it showed it's really efficient. Yet the issue part is the safety part.
yeah. And here lies the challenge for you. As you think about your procedures of how to lead a team meeting, right? Or to do various different procedures and actions, what can you do to optimize those? There's always ways to improve the procedures or actions, and that's sort of the point of AQ, and more generally improving all your answers, being students of your answers. Okay, so now we're at a discussion break. We've covered quite a bit, sort of introduction. We're going to get off the mountain here and sort of, get in the business world and sort of talk about AQ. We have more to cover with the 5 high AQ practices, but at this point, I want to see if there's any comments or questions. In terms of comments, feel free to give pushback or say something you like. And of course, I'd be happy to address any questions. So the floor is open, and Eileen and Roger, I'll let you sort of moderate anything in the chat, and we'll go from there. So let's field a couple questions.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, please use the raise hand option if you'd like to say it yourself. When you use the raise hand option, you pop to the top of the screen. And please feel free to ask any question you may have. We have Brian for us in this session, and he's happy to answer any of your questions. I personally wanted to highlight something more than a question. It was the metaphor part when you spoke about what leadership is to you. And just to highlight and reiterate and acknowledge what you've said, Brian, when we use the intelligent answer, if I may. It's then when the information or your answer sticks in mind. So when you use the leadership metaphor and you said, I'm strong alone, we're stronger together, I'm sure this will stay in our minds. And every time we think of the definition of leadership, I personally would remember your definition, and I would remember the metaphor, and I would remember the visual you've used. So this is not to say that metaphors are stronger than stories or concepts or procedures, but this is to just reiterate what you've said, that in different situations with different people, answering different questions, the answer makes a lot of difference. And the more we pay attention to what the question is, the more we are mindful, the better we can answer using all of these tools, if I can call them.
And it's a circular structure. All the answers are important. They're all equal. They serve different purposes. Just to amplify some of the importance of the different answers. Aristotle said, metaphors are a sign of genius. You're right. You're making connections in a creative way. Victor Hugo said, ideas change the world. Those are concepts, right? As a subordinate working for someone to get the right idea conveyed to you can be really powerful. Gandhi talked about sort of, we reveal our intentions through actions, right? Actions are important. So you can see all these answers being important and delivered at the right time to the right question, they're going to make a difference, right? You could be a salesperson and not quite have your procedure just right. So if as a manager, you can sort of modify that procedure, identify key action to close the deal. I mean, all these answers can be influential, and it depends on which questions they're addressing.
Exactly so, because sometimes people think they like stories better. Everybody likes metaphors and stories. I'm going to stick to those. But sometimes that's not the answer. Or at the other end of the continuum, some people know the procedure and know the concepts, but they cannot put it out. So the answer does not really reflect what they know, their knowledge. It's just not serving the purpose. So they're not as influential with their answer as they wish to be. Roger.
I just want to add up on what you said, Dr. Alian. I would say, Dr. Brian and Dr. Alian, that it's more about understanding the questions. Like, even if we know all the answers, we gotta have to understand the question first, really understand the perception of the other party, the person standing in front of us, understand the question, how the question, what happened in the question, and then get to this part, which is the AQ. So in this AQ study, it's really important to be aware of the types of questions, what kind of questions are being asked, the intentions of the people asking the questions. And this is where we have this discussion, Dr. Alian, amongst many things we talked about regarding AQ. We talked about the EQ and the importance of emotional intelligence in this. Since Dr. Alian is an emotional intelligence coach, this is very important, relating this and being empathetic and understanding others and being able to reflect on what they say before connecting to the AQ.
Absolutely true. Yeah, thank you, Roger. George.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize on whoever's gonna sell something or use his procedures or concepts or actions, he's got to understand first the surroundings of the audience around him. So not every procedure works everywhere. Each like in each situation, you've got a different procedure you got to use, and you got to be really intelligent how to pick what questions and you're going to ask, or what answers you're going to provide in accordance to the background of the people you're talking to their culture and so forth. That's it.
If I could just amplify that point, then maybe we could move on to the 5 AQ practices and have some time for discussion at the end. But that's a great point. We're going to get to all these points, frankly, many of them, but Answer in context is high IQ practice 5. You have to consider the when and where. So if you're talking to a group of individuals that are very junior, perhaps your procedure answer has to be more specific, more involved, more detailed. But if you're talking to very senior people, maybe your procedure is very high level. It's a simple 3-step summary. So you always have to consider the context for procedures or for any of the answer types. All right. If I could, I'm going to move on here. I want to, we have one more question.
Yes. Sometimes we're doing a sales which we fall in the trap of the open-end questions. That means which is yes or no. And I don't think in this case the AQ would help us, because if this person sitting in front of us asks us a question like, did you achieve your sales pitch? And the answer is yes. And then you fall in the trap here. And to me, the question will still play the most important role in the answer that you want to give.
Yeah, totally agree. And rather than amplifying what you're saying, I think I'll move on to the next slide, because we're going to talk about questions first, actually, in the high IQ practices. So let me move on to that if I could. So thank you. We want to talk about the high IQ practices. So this is, when our study in the golf instructors and then generalizing the book to business professionals, I want to talk about some high IQ practices that the golf instructors did to be effective and things that you can do to be effective as well. So we're going to start with question recognition. And this acknowledges the fact that when a question is asked, that they may use the words why, what, or how, or they may not. Questions can be implicit, right? Nonverbals. If I'm sitting here crossing my arms, I'm saying, why are you talking to me today? I don't know if I believe what you're saying. But as we know with young children, sometimes they'll use the same question and it'll mean different things. They may say how. And sometimes they mean how, sometimes they mean what, sometimes they mean why. So question recognition is high IQ practice 0. You have to understand the question in the AQ terms that's being asked, regardless of the specific words that are being uttered. So for example, going back to a sales context, I worked with a sales organization that had problems with question recognition. And the junior sales reps would be selling to senior buyers. The senior buyers, explicitly or implicitly, were asking why questions. Why should we buy from you? And they wanted story or theory, business strategy. And these junior sellers, they interpreted, they were hearing how questions. So they didn't hear why should I buy from you? They heard how do we work with you? And they proceeded as a SaaS company to talk about procedures and actions, features and functions in the software. And what happened? They lost the deals, right? They're answering the wrong question. They were going to lose to begin with. They did question recognition poorly. So you have to start here with high IQ practice 0. High IQ practice 1 is provide 6 answers. This is the foundation. For any given conversation, you should be prepared to have 6 answers and then deliver the best answer, singular best answer. So in terms of AQ, if you are a leader and that's important to you, think of your leadership brand, have 6 answers. Or for your sales organization, can you communicate your value proposition in terms of 6 answers? Have those ready ahead of time, but dynamically be ready in the situation. One takeaway for you is take your most important conversation, think about 6 answers, and then it'll go a long way for you being prepared for conversations. Here's an example. In my book, I have an interview AQ chapter, and I worked with a student, and she wanted to convey her #1 soft skill in the interview process. So she prepared 6 answers for her #1 soft skill. She was a leader, and during any given interview, she was able to provide the right answer. Okay, and the company, Big 4 CPA firm, hired her. And they said she was one of the best communicators they've ever had and one of the best candidates they've ever had. The truth is she was a great candidate. AQ amplified her strengths and made her even better. High IQ practice 2 is the idea that metaphorically, the answers appeal to the left and right side of the brain. So on the left side of the brain, theory, concept, and procedure are very objective. They are analytical. This appeals to the left side of the brain. The right side of the brain is the opposite. It is creative. It is gestalt. So story, metaphor, and action appeal to that part of the brain. So high IQ practice 2 is answer twice. For very important questions, why, what, and how, not all questions, you'll provide 2 answers in combination. You provide a concept metaphor, a metaphor or concept in order. So for example, if you ask me what a trusted advisor is, I could say a trusted advisor is defined as a concept as someone that does more than 2 types of business with us. Okay, that's a definition. As a metaphor, a trusted advisor, we want to be the 3rd card in the Rolodex behind the lawyer, the accountant, and then us, right? You deliver both in combination, you're making it really clear what a trusted advisor is. High IQ practice 3 is provide compliments. So this is how conversations flow. Adjacent answers support each other. So for example, we're all familiar with Romeo and Juliet, and I could tell you the story of it. Then if I could follow up and say, it's like star-crossed lovers, that's a metaphor. So now imagine your next important conversation, say in sales, where the client delivers a story and you can transform that into a metaphor. That's pretty powerful. Or imagine, you know, if you relate to the what question and concept, you're all in training here to become mentors. And I could define what mentors are. Mentors give career support, social support, they role model. You're starting to understand what it is. Then I could discuss the procedure, perhaps of social support, because you're not sure how to do that. And I could say social support is open door policy. Let me describe the 3 steps you would do to implement an open door policy. So the point of complementary answers is this supports a logical flow. And if you provide compliments, you're going to find your impact is going to go up. Also note, opposite answers can resist each other. So imagine if you went to see the movie of Julia Childs, okay? You go to the movie, what do you expect? To hear her story. But imagine if recipes were flashing on the screen instead of a story. Those are equivalent to procedures. Many of us might walk out, right? This is the fact that you're going to get a why question answered as a story. You're not interested in the how answer. So we have to be careful. If someone asks a why question, if we provide a how response, a procedure, it can be resisted. So this is sort of the opposite of complementary answers. Opposite answers can potentially be high risk. The 4th practice area is answer with style. So each of us has our own style. Yellow answers are analytical, red answers are relational, making emotional connections, blue answers are practical. So you want to think about your own style. So as a professor, before this research, I was very, very analytical. When I would teach classes, I would have scholarly articles, and I abdicated the blue side of the equation. I would not have a textbook. I wasn't concerned with how, and I realized through AQ that I had a gap in my communication I needed to improve. So you need to understand your own communication style as well as others. If you're talking to someone that's very relational, regardless of the questions being asked, you want to provide more stories and metaphors throughout the conversation to ingratiate yourself to them and to communicate in a way that they prefer. Finally, high IQ practice 5 is answer in context. We see the picture of Monet, this woman with an umbrella. Is she happy? Well, that depends on the context. If I said it's a sunny day, you'll probably say, yeah, she's happy. If I said it's raining right now and she has her umbrella up, you might say, well, she's not happy. We all know context matters, when and where. All 6 answers must reflect the context. So for example, if you're selling to a pharmaceutical company, the story maybe should be about a pharmaceutical company. If you're selling to a bank, the story needs to be about a bank. So all 6 answers must reflect the local context. So this really brings us to the end of our discussion here. And we've gone through the 5 high IQ practices. So this is the final slide here. I have some slides with my contact information next. I'll briefly show before I pass over to Eileen. But again, interested in your comments and questions.
This is a good opportunity for everybody who has a comment, question, to please either put it in the chat area or use the raise hand option to ask it. Until we get a comment or a question, I just want to say one more time, very interesting and very inspiring what you have just taken us through, Brian. Amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, so if no questions, I want to thank you all for taking part in this wonderful session, and especially thank.
Sorry for interrupting. You have
Sorry.
George. We have George who raised his hand.
Okay, it doesn't show on my screen. Sorry. Go ahead, George.
No, I didn't raise my hand. I was just clapping for Brian.
Brian. Okay.
My bad.
All right. I see people just saying thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. The session is great. Thank you. And I want to say the same. I want to specifically thank you, Brian, for such an enlightening journey. All the attendees will receive a certificate of attendance from us, and that should be coming to your inbox within the coming 7 days. If you have any further questions to Brian or any queries about the AQ, please email them to support@stokos.com.au. We'll put this email in the chat box now. Thank you again. And it is time for the group photo. So I just popped in the email address. Please send any queries you may have. I sent it directly to you, Roger. I'll send it to everyone now. There you go. And it's time for our group photo. So if you're comfortable opening your cameras with
I am
a
Annie.
smile to say thank you, Brian. And on the count of 2, 1, 2. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Really an amazing and inspiring session. And any questions or queries we get after this session, we will email to you. Once the recording is finalized and edited, we will post it on our YouTube channel and everybody will get the link to watch, and we will put it also on the social media. So we expect also to hear from people who couldn't make it to today's session, and we'll let you know of those questions or comments.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And you have a good day, Brian.
Likewise.
Bye.
Goodbye,
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.